Welcome to Pearced Off, the counter-apologetic segment with Jonathan M.S. Pearce for the Skepticule Podcast. And this time we'll be talking about, yet again, something that I'm sure you'll all agree on if you're skeptical like me. But, you know, preaching to the choir and to the converted is, or deconverted in this case, is, I suppose, something that I do. So, this, though, is pretty important, and it's pretty important in the world of religion, in the world of Christianity, because it is the cornerstone of Christianity. So what I'm going to talk about today is the atonement. The atonement being Christ's payment for sins in his death. Okay, so without which Christianity doesn't make any sense at all, because there is no Christ, or there's no reason for Christ to have been incarnated on earth and to be God in man. So that sacrificial death, you know, without that, the sense of being a Christian and of what you believe sort of dissipates. And the atonement is one of those funny things that, being a central tenet, it is wholly incoherent. So I've talked before possibly about the Holy Trinity and how that doesn't really make sense. Well, this is potentially even more important as something that's incoherent. In very simplistic terms, I'll say it like this. So let's assume that there's the classical theistic notion of God who has perfect foreknowledge, you know, this omni-God. He has knowledge of all future events and counterfactuals. So counterfactuals are the statements that if this, then that. So God would know if this happened, then that would happen. That's how divine foreknowledge kind of works. So now we have this situation where God is creating and has full knowledge of exactly what he is creating. This actually means that God has at least some moral culpability for sins committed by humanity. So here's an analogy. I create, as an awesome scientist, a sentient life form in the lab. I design this from scratch. I could have done it otherwise, but I choose to do it like this. I know that this life form that I create will escape from my lab and go and murder people in town. I know this utterly and completely and 100%. And they do this using the mechanisms which I've designed into them. Imagine that one of these sentient life forms kills your daughter, right? And yet, even knowing this destruction they will cause, I, as a scientist, decide to create them anyway. Now, they might also do some very nice things, maybe create a flower arrangement in the middle of the town, do some loving things. But also there's this kind of murder and death and rape and whatever other horrible things that these sentient life forms could cause. And the police knock at my door. They say it's my fault. But using the Christian's logic, I deny this, arguing that they use their own mechanisms to murder. But the police say that I designed those mechanisms. I knew what they would do and created them anyway, and let them run amok. The police laugh off my defence, and they lock me up. That's the end of the mad scientist who created evil beings. And another analogy would be this. I'm the CEO of a car company. I design a car which I know is faulty. I know exactly when it will be faulty and crash to cause injury and death. I know this and create it anyway. The car fulfills its destiny and causes death. I, as CEO who also designed and manufactured a car, am rightfully held responsible. So we have this scenario where God creates humanity knowingly to sin. He then sacrifices himself to himself, whilst also praying to himself, to sit on his own right hand in heaven for eternity. Firstly, that's no big sacrifice, right? Indeed, it seems in reality a very small sacrifice. I can imagine far more noble and greater sacrifices from mere humans than this one. And secondly, the need for payment is pointless. Why God would need in any way to balance the books is beyond me. And why this sacrifice would balance the books at all anyway is beyond me. So not only the need for sacrifice, but how that does actually for balancing the books, and also how that balancing the books takes place, is quite beyond me. And there's nothing about the atonement that makes any sense. And the main thrust of what I'm saying is that the moral culpability lies with God. You can see why theists are uncomfortable sometimes with the notion of divine foreknowledge. And it's quite problematic. And there's this move towards something called open theism, which is that God doesn't know freely willed decisions. But then God's creation is a bit like random. Well, I'm going to create all these humans. God knows what they'll do. Oh, no, God doesn't know what they'll do. And we'll just react accordingly. well, that's not the sort of great making property we would expect from God. And so therefore, open theism, I mean, it's fraught with problems from the biblical text itself anyway, but it doesn't seem a plausible account of who we imagine this God, especially a classical theistic God, to be. So therefore, okay, he does have divine foreknowledge of freely willed actions. Well then, in that case, why is he creating us to sin? And why does he need to send himself down to sacrifice himself to himself to pay for that sin, which actually he's morally culpable for anyway? Or if we don't agree with moral culpability for whatever reason, he's causally responsible for, necessary even. So the atonement is fraught with issues and problems, but these analogies to me really point out the obvious flaws. I'll be interested to see what the Pauls think. As ever, question everything and drop by my blog. I'm a Tippling Philosopher. Goodbye.